Virginia delegate Elizabeth Guzman is a social worker, and she's planning on reintroducing a bill in Richmond that she says would help protect LGBTQ children from their parents and guardians who may not be affirming of their child's sexual orientation and gender identity.
This is how we're going to push back.
Her bill would expand the state's definition of child abuse and neglect to include parents who do not affirm their child's gender identity or sexual orientation.
If this go ahead and becomes law, it's going to get to a point where the government is just going to give every parent a handbook of how to raise their child, and any person who does not follow that handbook is abusing the child, right? What I'm going to be sharing with you guys is a video that is just, I don't know, like, it's one thing to say, it's one thing to suggest that children should, undergo gender affirming surgery. It's one thing to say, yes, let's try to, introduce, to tell parents that there's an option of, chemically castrating your child because that child believes that they belong to the opposite sex. It is one thing to say that. It is one thing to say, let's parents be allowed to do this to their children. It is one thing. It is then another thing to suggest a law, a bill, to introduce a bill that will expose parents to criminal prosecution if they refuse to affirm the gender of their child. I mean, I've seen something like this in Canada. It is terrible. It is terrible. It is the government having control over what happens in people's family. Now, I'm not saying the government should not control how children are being raised. If that is the case, then child abuse will not be an issue. But to define child abuse, which I think this bill is trying to do, to extend the definition of child abuse to mean you are abusing your child if you decide not to use the child's preferred pronoun or preferred name or whatever it is. If you refuse to affirm your child's gender identity, then you are abusing that child. I think that is one step forward into something ridiculous, like the gates of hell. That's the pathway to it. That's if you've not already entered. Like, this is terrible. How will you even suggest something like this? But that is what has been introduced in Virginia, and that is what we are going to be talking about today.
Virginia delegate is introducing a new bill centered around parents and how they handle their child's sexual orientation and gender identity.
7 News reporter Nick Minock explains why this is controversial.
Right now, parents' rights and LGBTQ protections are a big focus in Virginia. Thousands of students in Virginia have walked out of class protesting Governor Glenn Youngkin's newly proposed model policies on the treatment of transgender students at school.
Trans rights are human rights.
And Governor Youngkin...
All right, let me pause this video here. There's this thing that I keep hearing when these people in the LGBTQ community are protesting or are having a rally or whatever it is they are having in America with their rainbow color and colorful display of I don't know what I'll call this. Like, it's just satanic ideas, satanic practices, things that people 5 years ago or maybe let's say 50 years ago would be ashamed of. Now it is public display. Everybody has to see it. And when they are protesting or rallying around this clarion call for Satan, this clarion call for demons, when they are doing this nonsense, they always go with chants, and chants are not even arguments. Like, trans rights are human rights. What are trans rights? Like, before you say trans rights are human rights, what are trans rights? What are the rights of somebody who is transgender that are not the same with every other human being? What extra rights are they asking for? Because that's something people don't notice. When they say trans rights are human rights, they are asking for the rest of society to acknowledge a new set of rights, rather, and recognize that these rights are fundamental human rights. And what are those rights exactly? The right not to be misgendered, not to be dead named, for the right to not have somebody say something that will offend you. That is what trans rights are. Trans rights are, don't do anything that will offend me. Don't do anything that will make me unhappy. I may commit suicide if you finish saying something like this. And if you go ahead saying it, you're infringing on my fundamental human right as a trans individual. You are affecting my life. You are inflicting harm upon me because you don't agree with me. Like that is what trans rights are. And for somebody to think these are human rights, the right to not be offended is a fundamental human right. The right for people to refer to you the way you want to be referred to, not according to the way they perceive you to be. That means my judgment about you is invalid. Your judgment about yourself is what I should uphold. You are imposing your own views upon me. I am not allowed to think anything contrary or express anything contrary. You want to control me. That is what trans rights are. Let nobody make any mistake about it, because I've listened to these people and I've listened to all the nonsense they have to say, and this is the general conclusion, that when there's a way I feel, when there's something that I think about myself, anybody opposing that is inflicting harm upon me. So therefore, my right to not be offended should be recognized. Society should recognize it. That's too much to ask, don't you think? Don't you think it is too much to ask? Don't you think no reasonable society should listen to you? Well, let's continue listening to this report.
Argues schools shouldn't keep parents in the dark about their child's sexual orientation and gender identity.
These same progressives in Fairfax County actually believe that they should lock parents out of their children's lives. They think that parents have no right to know what your child is discussing with their teacher or their counselor.
Democratic Virginia delegate Elizabeth.
And this is just what the governor just said here is absolutely the same with what I see teachers talk about on TikTok. By the way, I want to suggest to any reasonable human being, TikTok is not a place to hear anything sane. Americans are just disgracing themselves on TikTok. Anyway, everybody is disgracing themselves on TikTok, right? But people in the West are doing it even more. Like, you guys are taking it to the next level. It's next level of just disgrace. You know, you are exposing your ignorance, exposing your stupidity, exposing your lack of good parental upbringing. You're just exposing the fact that you have a demented way of thinking, exposing the fact that your reasoning are just stay off TikTok. Just stay off TikTok. It's the worst. All the social media all the social media sites are just terrible, but TikTok is the worst. And what I hear teachers on TikTok say is, they are now the parents of children. They are now the children's new parents. If your parents will not recognize you, I will recognize you. I am your parent now. That's what we hear teachers say. We hear teachers hiding things from your child. Hiding things about a child from their parents. That is terrible. That is terrible. I don't care your idea of parenting or what you think a parent should do. You have no right. You have no right to interfere in how a parent chooses to raise their child. You have no right for you to hold information from them. There is no difference in my book. There's no difference between you and somebody who is flirting with a married person in order to break up that family, in order to destroy that home, because you are practically destroying a home. You are turning children against their parents. That is literally what you are doing, and that is wicked. As in, the hottest place in hell is definitely reserved for somebody who would do such a thing to a family. As a parent, they care for these children. They bring these children into the world. Their finance, every aspect of the child's life is being taken care of by the parents. They do all this to ensure that this child will have a bright future. The love they have for these parents is more than you as a teacher can ever imagine. Despite how much you say, oh, I love the kids in my class. I love the kids in my class. You love them more than their parents? You think you do? And that those parents are wicked? Of course, they are horrible parents. Of course, they are parents who engage in terrible things. But an average parent, you are going to hide things. If what that parent is doing is wrong, don't you think reporting them to the authorities would be the right move? But you can't report them to the authorities because what they are doing is not wrong. It's not illegal. You have a view that you are imposing on children. And when children are like, we are receptive to this view and want to socially transition, or we think we are of the opposite sex, or we want a new name, or what a new pronoun, whatever it is these children are doing, because you've fed them with nonsense, you are going to hide it from their parents. A child will be socially transitioning in school, and the parents will not know that their boy is actually actually acting as a girl in school. And the parents will be totally unaware of this. And you don't see that this is demonic. Jesus Christ. Ha. In Nigeria, you will not even try. Anyway, we are in Nigeria, I guess, in the move of this nonsense, we are way behind. Glory to God. Because you won't even try it. You won't even try it. Forget the law. The law of the streets will be activated. I'm telling you. And you don't like the law of the streets. If you think you are being marginalized, that is nothing compared to what a Nigerian parent will do to you. They discover you are doing such a thing with their child. Now, let's keep watching.
Guzman is a social worker, and she's planning on reintroducing a bill in Richmond that she says would help protect LGBTQ children from their parents and guardians who may not be affirming of their child's sexual orientation and gender identity.
This is how we're going to push back.
Her bill would expand the state's definition of child abuse and neglect to include parents who do not affirm their child's gender identity or sexual orientation.
There's an investigation also in place that is not only, from a social worker, but there's also a police investigation before we make the decision that there's going to be a CPS charge.
What could the penalties be if, the investigation concludes and it's concluded that a parent is not affirming of their LGBTQ child? What could the consequences be?
Well, we first have to have an investigation. It could be a felony, it could be a misdemeanor, but we know that a CPS charge could harm, your employment, could harm your education.
And Alexandria, Nick Minox, 7 News.
At the point, I think it's going to come to a point that the government is just going to, if this go ahead and becomes law, it's going to get to a point where the government is just going to give every parent a handbook of how to raise their child, and any person who does not follow that handbook is abusing the child, right? I guess that's what it's going to come to. There's no, as a parent, this is what you should do, this is what you should not do, this is what we'll advise you to do, this is what society will say you should not do, these are good parenting tips, these are bad parenting tips. They are no longer going to be tips and suggestions. It's not going to be commandments, it's going to be law. And if you don't do that, you're breaking the rule. You are a criminal. You are abusing your child. This is essentially what this is about. And she says she's pushing back. Pushing back on what? What exactly is she pushing back on? On parents who think this is terrible, the idea of mutilating a child, of allowing a child to undergo chemical castration or gender affirming medical procedures, that a child does not have consent and does not know what they are choosing and hence should wait till they are old enough to make certain decisions. That common sense, as in the sentence that I just make, is so common sense that somebody who is opposing this and thinking, oh, you know what would be a better way to reach a consensus on the issue of transing the kids, and turning the kids to something other than what they are born as. What would be a very counter argument and counter movement is to make it criminal for a parent not to affirm their child's gender identity. That is just genius. That is the best move. And we are going to introduce this bill. And this is supposed to do what? I mean, it's just ridiculous. Americans, you guys are doing well. You guys, your progress knows no bound. Canada is already far ahead, and you guys are catching up. Especially some parts anyway, not every part. And I believe it's not every one of you, but I mean, the ones that are screaming the loudest, the ones that are always on the streets shouting trans rights are human rights, are screaming louder than any other person. And that is all we see in Africa here. That is all we see when we think of the West. That is the idea now. I just want you guys to know. The sane ones among you, I want you all to know that this rubbish movement, this rubbish idea is what every other person is seeing around the world. In Africa, in Asia, I am sure this is what they are saying about you guys. That is what it is now. That is when you say America, what comes to they say that place where a man can become a woman, where it is where they are introducing crazy ideas like what this woman just said, and said with a straight face like this is common sense. This is just basic understanding of how the world should always be. What are you going to do?